On today's show, we got a big
What if?
Mark Cuban brought it up, served it up to us on a silver platter today.
The truth. Nick's favorite player. What if he had a Dallas Maverick jersey?
On today's Locked On Mavs.
And this is Locked On Mavericks Podcast.
Hey, Dallas Mavericks are NBA champions. Bang! Bang! It's good! And the Mavericks have won the game!
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
And welcome. You're locked on to the Dallas Mavericks. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member and coordinator for the Locked On Podcast Network. And joining me, as always, my co-host, contributor, and writer at Mavs.com, the Pierce Poopin' Pal, the One More Thing King. What you got for me, Isaac Harris?
Well, so we had a whole different what if. So this is obviously What If Wednesday. During the off season. We've had this kind of themed shows, 5 days a week, because we are still going 5 days a week during the off season as far as a daily Mavericks podcast here.
Correct.
So on Wednesdays we do these what ifs and we go throughout Mavericks history and we're like, hey, what if this happened? What if this happened with this player? Whatever. We had a whole different subject, and then bam, this Paul Pierce, Chris Mannix story comes out. Two of Nick's favorite people, his favorite combination of media and player. And then Mark Cuban tweets about it, and then Nick's like, hey, we got to do this. So
we got to do it. We got to get into it.
The past hour for me has been researching Paul Pierce and Mavericks and everything.
So absolutely, we will get into that today. Our what if is, what if the Mavericks traded for Paul Pierce in 2007?
Oh God,
8? The timeline is kind of blurry, but we'll get into it. And it's small market versus big market Wednesdays on Locked On NBA. Join Jake Madison and Locked On Pelicans host and John Krause, Locked On Celtics host, for a look at the NBA from all angles on the Locked On NBA podcast today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. All right.
Shout out to Jake too. Jake
is doing his shows right now from Alabama, from a family member's house, because his house still does not have power because of Hurricane Ida. So if anybody is still stuck out there, man, our thoughts and prayers definitely go out to you guys. But yeah, Jake is a trooper. He's done his Pelicans podcast. He's done his Locked On NBA podcast. I've not had to worry about him as the channel coordinator, which I appreciate. But before we get into all the what ifs and everything, first I want to mention Ced Ceballos. Ced Ceballos, a member of the Mavericks family, has been in the hospital for a long time, sent out just an absolute gut-wrenching cry for help almost of a tweet. So if you go look at Ced Ceballos' Twitter, you can go check that out. He's been dealing with COVID. He's been in the hospital for 10 days, and he is just struggling. So, yeah, we're definitely praying. He is in our prayers. Ced Ceballos, just going through it right now.
Yeah, big Ced, man. He's become a staple pregame. Seeing him courtside next to the team and everything. He's been wearing some awesome Pumas the past couple of seasons, and we've had fun with him over the past few years. Ced says and everything, but yeah, member of the Mavs family, praying for you, Ced. Big Ced, man, get better, and hopefully see you next to the team on the sidelines coming up soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, let's get into Dallas Mavericks traded for Paul Pierce in 2007-2008, before maybe the 2007-8 season. This came up today because Mavs clutch points, I think. Not the greatest Mavs follow on Twitter. I would not recommend it.
No way. This is great graphics. Pull up this design. I need the full picture.
Tweeted this out, and supposed to be big three.
Is that Canva?
Dirk Nowitzki and Jason Kidd and Paul Pierce were on there, but all wearing number 34, by the way, which is kind of weird on this graphic. But Paul Pierce told Mark Cuban in 2007 he wanted to join the Mavs. Then Mark Cuban responded to it, and this all came up because of a Chris Mannix article that came out about Paul Pierce saying he was done with the Celtics in 2007. Before the big three of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen were even assembled, he was done with the Celtics and wanted to get traded. We'll bring up that quote in just a little bit. But then Mark Cuban responds and says, quote, "It gets better. We had a deal done. We had a three-way trade done. All teams agreed to their part of the deal. When we got to the trade call, the third team killed the deal because they didn't want They didn't know that a first was going to the Celtics. They chose not to do the deal at all. And then later he says, in response to the comments, this was after 2008. So a lot to unpack here, a ton to unpack here. First, let me go back to the Chris Mannix quote from the article. Let me just set the whole stage before we go into all the what ifs. Chris Mannix writes, in spring of 2007, Paul Pierce ran into Mavericks owner Mark Cuban in Las Vegas. Pierce told Cuban, I'm your missing piece. Pierce pushed Schwartz, his agent, to attempt to engineer a trade to Dallas. This is in 2007. I'm in my prime, and I'm watching all these other guys in the playoffs, says Pierce. It was depressing. I thought I was out of there. I thought it was over. So then that gets posted. Mark Cuban says it gets even better. A trade was even made and done at the time. So that's where this whole came from. This is where the what if came from. This is a new, basically, what if in Mavericks history, I guess, now that gets to be added to the Dwight Howard stuff that we were going to do today and all the other trades that were about to happen.
Yeah, Paul's been pretty open about this, about wanting to go to Dallas back then too. I was digging around trying to find past pieces, and he had a story where he was on the Up in Smoke or All in the Smoke,
All the
podcast.
Smoke,
All the Smoke. There you go. Back in 2020,
Up in Smoke,
Up in Smoke,
just
baby.
gone. It's Up in Smoke.
But he was on that podcast back in 2020 last year, and he said the same thing then. He said, I wanted to go join Dirk in Dallas. He said, I thought my time in Boston was up. And, you look at that season, that 2006-2007 season in Boston, they won 24 games. And, he just averaged over 26 points a game. Like he was a stud. This was before he was halfway, he was a 10-time All-Star in his career. He had made 5 All-Star teams up to that point. He obviously, do your math here, had five more All-Star games after that moment. But, for him, one, my mind goes to, can they go back and find Cuban for tampering or? Yeah,
right. Can they retroactively tamper? Is there
the fact that Mark and Paul had this conversation in Vegas, in 2007, 2006.
Spring 2007 in Vegas. So it wasn't like summer league or anything.
Which, hey, you know what? I'm going to believe that Mark didn't even talk to him. It was just Pierce walking up to him and telling him, hey, I'm your missing piece. Come get me. I want to come to Dallas.
The language is he ran into him, literally ran into him like as fast as
like a Jason Kidd holding a glass of water, run into him type thing.
We know it was soda, right? Like it was soda, the Jason Kidd.
So it kind of sets the stage of the what if of going into that summer. So that was spring 2007 that happens. So let's just, assuming if you go by the definition of spring, that's after the trade deadline in February. Yeah. So going to that summer, that's when Boston decided, hey, we're really going to go after and go get our guys. They went and formed their big three, the Garnett trade and all that. But so I started doing all my research on this. I'm like, all right, so that means that trade, if it would have happened, it would have happened in the summer of 2007. And then I went back and saw Mark's tweet, and he's like, it happened after 2008. And I'm like, hold up. Did Boston really want to trade Paul Pierce after they formed the big three and all their success?
Yeah, so we're thinking this, right? Like, I'm thinking, as I'm reading all this, I'm thinking, okay, and I'm seeing this in real time happen and saying, okay, so the Mavericks were going to make that deal in spring of 2007, like you said, maybe trade deadline summer of 2007, something like that. And Paul Pierce would have been gone. The Celtics at that time, by the way, were not in a really great place. They had missed the playoffs there for 2 years in a row. They had been out in the first round the 2 years before that. Paul Pierce had only made the playoffs 4 years out of his first, however many, like 7 or 8 years there in Boston. It was just a rough time for him there to start his career. And so you're thinking, okay, they made this trade. Then your mind starts going into what if directions. Okay, what happens to Kevin Garnett? The 2008 title never happens. And then Cuban comes in and just throws this, like, I don't know, a Molotov cocktail in the middle of it and says, in response to these comments, this was after 2008 that they would have made this trade. So coming up, let's get into what does that mean? So how could this have happened? And then there's basically 2 different timelines if we're getting this right, if we're understanding this. And so we'll talk about this. We'll talk about all the what ifs. If they did make the trade in 2007, what happens then? What would the Mavericks look like if they got Paul Pierce then? We'll talk about that coming up. But before we do, let me tell you about Sweatblock. Sweatblock is Doctor created, doctor recommended. It's these wipes that you wipe under your armpits the night before, and you don't deal with sweat. If you deal with profuse sweat all the time, you're wearing like a gray shirt and you're like, oh, dang, I can't wear this outside today because I know I'm just going to sweat right through it. My armpits, my lower back, whatever it is. You get a dry shirt guarantee from Sweatblock, so you don't have to deal with that. You don't have to deal with all the, the problems of trying to find new clothes, holding down your arms all the time. I've been in situations where I'm holding down my arm because if I lift it too high.
I have a question.
Yeah, you have a question, you just raise it like this. And you can't lift your elbow above your shoulder because all of a sudden you'll be exposed. You won't be exposed anymore with Sweatblock. You get your confidence back in that way. So get Sweatblock. Doctor created, doctor recommended. Go to sweatblock.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDON. You get 20%. 20% is a pretty good percentage off. So go try it. Go check it out. At least try it one time. If you're skeptical about it, they also have other products too. They have deodorant. They have stuff for your undercarriage. All kinds of things that you can get at sweatblock.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDON. Get 20% off today.
Undercarriage.
Also, I want to tell you about DirecTV. Does this sound familiar? You have one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff, the HBO Max that doesn't work because that app is just absolutely frustrating sometimes. Well, I want to tell you about something simple that gets all the entertainment you love without the hassle and a great way to finally get your TV together and to pull it all together. DirecTV Stream. It brings you your live TV on-demand favorites together like never before. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. All right, Isaac Harris, let's get into this. Let's get into this what if. He's laughing because he's never heard our bumper music actually played over the video. So the what if is, what if the Mavericks traded for Paul Pierce? 2007, 2008. The timeline is kind of weird now with that Cuban tweet.
Let's just operate summer 2008 because 2007, I started doing that. It gets a little weird, especially when you look at the books because Finley's like still on the books a little bit, but he doesn't count because he got amnestied. And so like the money shows up on a book whenever you look at it, but it didn't count towards the cap because he got amnestied. That was also before the Jason Kidd trade. The Kidd trade happened in, early 2008. So that's why even the graphic shows the big three of, Kidd, them. Let's just operate that it happened, that the what if would have happened in the summer 2008 because Kidd would have already been there at that point.
Yeah, Jason Kidd trade happens the trade deadline of 2008. So
yeah, February 2008.
So if it happened in 2007, it would be before Kidd and all that. So that's really interesting too. So okay, the 2008 team, which by the way, this is why it's weird because this would have been after the Celtics combined their big three of Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, won the title, and then now Cuban says they had a trade in the works, a 3-team trade to get Paul Pierce in Dallas.
Very interesting. Because,
that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, okay, yeah, it doesn't make sense from a Boston side, but let's just run with it. Let's just say they did. What would the trade look like at that point? When you look at Dallas's cap sheet, it almost would have had to been like Josh Howard was 28. He had to be in that deal. He had to be probably the centerpiece of that deal for Dallas. Dan Pierce had to probably be in the deal too because of the salary then. Because Dan Pierce making around 11 at that point. So you're looking at Paul Pierce. So another thing to point out in this, Paul Pierce, a season before the 2007 season, signed a 3-year extension with Boston. So you would have him under contract until a 2010, 2011 season. So you're not trading for like a 1-year thing of Paul Pierce in that scenario. So I think the what if is, and the deal that Cuban's alluding to is probably something because Jason Terry's over 30 at that point. I think you're looking at Josh Howard, Dampier, and maybe a first, 1 or 2 first-round picks. I think then he's getting rerouted somewhere else, and probably that third team was supposed to pay the first-round pick for Josh Howard, and then they weren't, and that's when it fell through.
Yeah, Pierce is making $18 million in the 2008-2009 season, so you have to kind of make that work. So you have Josh Howard that's making about $10 million that year, and then you can put that together with, I think they could have done Jerry Stackhouse and like something else, one of these other smaller contracts, or Sean Williams, Antoine Wright, a DJ Mbenga, like something like that they could have done. to make it work. So I think they probably would have, and then the picks, obviously, to sweeten the deal, and kept Dampier, because Dampier was a big part. Like, he was their starting center.
Huge part. There's a lot of, if he's in that deal, there is some ripple effects that we'll mention in a little bit of who they would not have gotten if Dampier was traded for Paul Pierce.
Yeah, absolutely massive. So I think that's the deal that would have gone down. But then, so now is, let's say Josh Howard, it's Josh Howard, Stackhouse, and like one other contract that gets traded for Paul Pierce. Now all of a sudden you're combining Dirk, 29-year-old Dirk, a 30-year-old Dirk, 35-year-old kid, Jet, Eric Dampier, and a young JJ Barea all of a sudden with Devin George still. And that's your team right there. Like, that is, and Paul Pierce was in his prime at that point.
Yeah.
That's a good team.
Yeah, so when I did my whole speculation, I just assumed Dampier was in the deal, because I think if Dampier is in it, then you really have to figure out who's your big man then, because then you're pretty much asking Sugana Diop to be your starting center at that point alongside Dirk, and then rolling out Pierce and Kidd and Jet. But I think the deal comes into, if you can pair Jason Kidd with Pierce and Dirk, then you're really talking something there. Because let's just say they did that. Let's say they pulled it off. They originally went that next season, 2008, 2009, they went 50-32 that season. So then you ask, like, how much better would they have been? Because they faced off against, without Pierce, normal real life Mavericks, faced off against the Nuggets in round 2 against a young Carmelo, Chauncey Billups, a young J.R. Smith, and they lost to the Nuggets. Would they have beaten them?
College student J.R. Smith.
College student who plays
golf professional.
And so let's just say they beat Denver. Now you're looking at a matchup against the Lakers in the conference finals. It's Pierce, Dirk, Kidd. If they still have Dampier going against Pau Gasol, Kobe, and those guys. And this same year that they beat, I think, Orlando, right? Courtney Lee.
Yeah, the Lakers beat Orlando in 2009. But
I just led with Courtney Lee, by the way. But
this is most recently a Maverick, so I guess you can. But this is when the Celtics would have just beat the Lakers in the finals in 2008. And Paul Pierce would have been going up against them in the Western Conference Finals. That is insane to me that would happen. That just never happens where the Finals MVP changes teams. Like, I think Kawhi was the first one.
That's true, yeah.
With Toronto.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think you can take it a step further. Do you have anything else on that season? Because I go into the next offseason, and that's where it gets even more fun.
Well, there's an interesting wrinkle here where I went down both rabbit trails. I said, okay, what if Cuban was mistaken? It actually happened in 2007, or what if it happened in 2008? Before 2008, at 2007, 2008 season, Avery Johnson was the coach.
Yeah, because Rick got hired in May 2008.
And then you make the change to Rick Carlisle that offseason in that 2008-2009 season, and it was Rick Carlisle. So what happens there?
What if they did so good in that first 2007 season that they kept Avery?
Yeah.
And then Rick doesn't show up, which a lot of people, was like, hey, at that point, because you're obviously talking about a Mavericks team who just lost to the Heat in 2006. So Paul Pierce is looking at this saying, man, this is why he told Dirk, this is why he told Cuban, I'm your missing piece, because he just watched them lose in the finals to Shaq.
I can get that many free throws.
I can get 90 free throws, okay? Get me in the finals with you guys. So that's a cool what if too, even though it feels like you talk to the right people. It's like, hey, Avery, his time was up there, but what if they made a huge run, back to the finals that first season, 2007, 2008, but
who knows? So then there's so many rabbit trails you can go down. What happens with Garnett?
Well, the next big trade for the Mavericks then just gets me even more excited and makes me think, man, how many big time runs would they have made? Because then they turn around, and if they do the deal that I thought that they would do, Dampier, Josh Howard in first, and Stackhouse wasn't, then they could still pull off Shawn Marion. Ooh. Because basically they traded Devin George and Jerry Stackhouse for Shawn Marion, who Marion was making $6 million back then. And if you could walk into the next couple of seasons with Jason Kidd, Paul Pierce, Shawn Marion, Dirk Nowitzki, and Jet, sign me up. I mean, are we looking at Dirk with like the Brady picture with like some rings on his hand at this point? Because I honestly think because I viewed Paul Pierce as a bigger Jason Terry, right? I mean, that for me, like if he was on this Dallas team, like he's not. I'm not going to put Paul Pierce out there and say, "Hey, be my Kawhi and just lock down people." But can you imagine Dirk with another wing scorer who could average 25 a game on the wing with size?
This is the secondary creator we've been talking about with Luka kind of deal, right? Like he takes the pressure off. Basically, when things broke down, the Mavericks turned to Dirk. Obviously, they dumped the ball to him, or Jet. Those are your two options. Jason Kidd, I guess sometimes, but Paul Pierce would have been a guy that you could do that. And he was, for all that I like to hate on Paul Pierce, he was great when things like broke down. You just needed a bucket, right? You just needed a bucket to get in some way. He was an efficient scorer, like a good scorer. He could score from all over the place, 3 levels, all that kind of stuff. Like he was really good at that and distributed, like could do basically everything that you needed offensively for this team, and would be an incredible combo with Dirk. Like
and Shawn Marion in that, like Shawn Marion on the wing, they would need another center. Like if they didn't get Dampier, because then you go down the rabbit trail too of like, all right, well, who's the next big man? Because if you traded Josh Howard for Paul Pierce, now all of a sudden you're not pulling off the Washington trade, right? You're not getting Caron Butler, Haywood, Deshaun Stevenson. Like those are 3 huge pieces to the 2011 team. But Josh Howard was a big trade, big piece in that. Who does Dampier get shipped out to? Eric Dampier gets shipped out to Charlotte a few seasons later for a young Tyson Chandler. Ooh. So you're not getting Tyson Chandler in that. So there is this center spot that they would have had to figure out next to Dirk, unless they just fully leaned in before everyone else and said, you know what, we're gonna fast forward time to 2020s and say Dirk should be at center, and it's Dirk and the Matrix at the 4 with Paul Pierce at the 3
and all the space in the world.
And it's like, sign me up. How many rings do we want at this point? Right. I mean,
we'll get into that and talk about what else the Mavericks could have done there and what the team would have looked like, how many titles they could have won.
I have some bigger picture questions too. That would be fun.
Coming up. But before we do, let me tell you about Built Bar. Built Bar is a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. They're always coming out with new stuff, always innovating, but they have the solid ones. We had a listener recently reach out and say that they just tried Built Bar for the first time. They love it. They went out and got the staples, right? They got the mint brownie, they got the coconut almond, and then they got the cookies and cream. Those are solid flavors. Shout out to Kelly who got Built Bar for the first time. Go get those. They also have new protein balls. If you're vegan, or if you've put these off because you don't really want gluten, grain, or dairy, these are gluten, grain, and dairy free. You can go check those out. They're always coming up with new stuff like that. They have Built Boost that helps boost your metabolism and boost your immune system, all that kind of stuff. It is caffeine free and all that kind of stuff you can put in your water. Great stuff. Use the promo code LOCKED15 to get any of these products from Built. Go check it out, built.com. Again, promo code LOCKED15. Also want to tell you about BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to put down some money on sports. The NFL is coming up. Isaac, you got your Ravens hat on right now. Isaac is a diehard Ravens fan. Let's go. Ravens, 4.5-point favorite over the Las Vegas Raiders on Monday night in Las Vegas. That seems kind of low. The Raiders aren't supposed to be that good.
Yeah, I'll take that, honestly. I was listening to Bill Simmons, and they're actually taking the Raiders in that. But Ravens dealing with injury stuff that it's kind of worrying me. But
Dobbins,
I got it. Ravens are winning on Monday night.
If you're feeling good about that, you can bet the money line. It's -210 if you want to go ahead and bet that. The over-under is 51 on BetOnline. All kinds of things you can bet on BetOnline. Go use it. Use the promo code LOCKEDON, and you will get a 100% welcome bonus with your first deposit. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. All right, Isaac Harris, let's get into some more what-ifs. We've been talking about Paul Pierce if he had become a Maverick in 2008. The Mavericks had just come off 2006 where they got beat in the finals by the Miami Heat. They were about to enter this, kind of weird era of, okay, is this thing going to end without Dirk actually ever getting a title? Is he just going to, ride off into the sunset or have to go, ring chase on a different team? Paul Pierce in 2008, would he have changed all that? Would he have changed 2011? I think so. Like, you have to start talking about that.
Yeah, I think you would have. I mean, I think. Well, we briefly touched on a while ago if they played Denver, in that second round, then they played the Lakers. What's that next year look like? They got beat by the Spurs in the first round in that 2000. I think it's 2008, 2009, or maybe the next
2000 year. In the first round, they got beat in 2009, 2010.
That's what it is.
In the first round against that Spurs team, the Mavs were the second seed. The Spurs were the seventh seed. Like that was a tough one. You had Ginobili, Duncan, Parker.
But see, I don't even I'm not even the biggest fan of that Spurs team. They would have beaten that Spurs team. They should have beaten that Spurs team because then that Spurs team gets swept in the second round. They play, Steve Nash, Amari, that fun, Phoenix team. And so then you ask, what if? It's like if they beat that Spurs team, then you're looking at that Mavericks score going against Nash and, gosh, who else is on it? Was Quentin Richardson on that team? Amari, Boris Diaw.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about the 7 seconds or less Suns right there.
Yeah. So, I mean, what a fun series that is. Nash going against, Dallas in the playoffs at that point. So that's a lot of fun. But yeah, how does it change 2011? I don't know. Do they have one or two rings before 2011 if they do this?
Well,
I don't know.
So let's say they make the trade in 2008. 2008. It's before the 2008-2009 season. There's only 2 seasons before that 2011. So.
I mean, are you not down for a three-peat or?
Are they that good? Do you think that team's that good to do a three-peat?
I think they are really dang good. I mean, especially if you can pull off Marion and your parent,
if you pulled that off, it changes.
Paul Pierce is really good. And I know there's probably people in the YouTube comments or whatever, people listen to the podcast and it's you see some of the dumb crap Pierce says on, on his media job or
anywhere doing anything.
Or it's you think about the wheelchair stuff, which is still funny to this day.
Or the Wizards I called game shot.
But Paul Pierce averaging 25, 26 a game in Boston, that's really good Paul Pierce. And if you could pair him with Dirk back then and still have a lot of these surrounding pieces, you could have still pulled off Jason Kidd. You could have still kept Jason Terry. You could have still traded for Shawn Marion. Those are some really good pieces alongside of them. I would trust they would have pulled off some other center if they had to get rid of Dampier and they couldn't get Haywood and couldn't get Tyson. They would have found someone else to play alongside Dirk. So I do think that they would have been really, really good. And I mean, I think there's a question of this too. With this coming out that Paul Pierce, saying, last year, saying right now, I wanted to go play with Dirk. I told Mark, I want to go play for Dallas. We hear all the time Dallas gets crapped on for not getting free agents. And this is a guy who's at the prime of his career who said, and if you guys really hate me being Mav State media, then you can turn it off at this point. But are we sure, some fans, are we sure the Mavericks just haven't been unlucky a lot of the times when it comes to big names? Are we, because we've walked through the Kemba Walker thing, how close they were to getting Kemba Walker. We know, and then Boston comes out of nowhere and Al Horford opts out and he gets this big deal from Philly. And now they have the money to sign Kemba Walker. We're hearing right now a Paul Pierce in the prime of his career saying, I want to go play with Dirk. I want to go play for the Mavericks. And then bam, they traded for freaking Kevin Garnett and they get Ray Allen to form this big three.
And Cuban saying a deal was done, but the third team backed out because they didn't agree to the rest of the terms.
Exactly. And
that's unlucky.
It just shows you another example that it's not just your franchise or your decision makers that jack things up sometimes.
It's a poverty franchise or anything like that.
Yeah, it sometimes you're just unlucky that how many more Paul Pierce situations has Dallas been in over the past 10 years that it's Paul Pierce, Kemba Walker, or Dwight Howard.
We were just about to talk about Dwight Howard, and Dwight Howard just famously changed his mind and then they had the trade
I think
happen.
we would. And because I think sometimes we hear that dialogue of man, players just didn't want to go play with Dirk. Dirk, it's so much easier to play with a guy like Luka compared to Dirk. And I'm I don't know if that's fully true. No. And hearing Paul Pierce say that too, he's been on the record and multiple times now. And Mark, confirming that, how many stories does Mark have that if he really wanted to just empty the, the cupboard here of saying, okay, here's the amount of players that we had deals for that we agreed to, and then X happened, and they went somewhere else. So I think and what if Paul Pierce did come to Dallas? They did trade. Does that change anything as far as their ability to get big names over the next 10 years? Does other free agents see that and say, oh man, like it wasn't just homegrown Dirk and coming to Dallas as a young kid and them just developing him. Paul Pierce went there and won a title. Like, yeah, man, that's cool. Does that change anything bigger for that? I don't know.
Especially if it happens earlier for Dirk, right? Part of the problem is, the last like 10 years or so, you've been dealing with the end of Dirk's prime. And so you're not coming to a prime Dirk where a player thinks I can go there and win a title. That player would have to go to the Mavericks and do a lot of heavy lifting, right? Dirk and Paul Pierce would do a ton of heavy lifting, and the third player or whatever player comes can ride their coattails a little bit.
Yeah.
And so if it happened earlier for Dirk, then maybe that does happen and it turns into a couple rings.
Yeah, and so I think that's my last question. I have my last bullet point is, what does it do for Dirk's career if he gets another ring or two? Like, what if Dirk ended his career with three rings compared to one? I mean, he's still already regarded as a top 15 player in the league, but what if he has 3 rings? Like, is he solidified as a top 10 player of all time for a lot of people out there? I don't know. Like, I really am curious on that, especially if he was a huge part of that, and was superstar Dirk for all 3 of those titles.
Man, this is a tough one.
But there's also the 2011 what if too, of how many times have we heard Dirk and them talk about saying, man, if 2006 didn't happen and that heartbreak and that hurt and that motivation didn't happen, then would 2011 have happened if we didn't have that hurt and stuff from 2006? I don't know. So what if they won in 2008? Does 2011 happen? Because do they have the same passion and motivation because they, from 2006, but they've already won it since then? So that's another what if too. We can't just assume 2011 happens if they won it in 2008.
Let's go through quickly since you asked that question. Okay, so ESPN in 2020, they did the top 75 players of all time, or the top 100 players of all time. Dirk was number 19 on that list.
Ooh,
let's say he wins one more title. Let's do 3 every once in a while if it becomes a debate. He's number 19, which is awesome. That's already great. He's above Kevin Garnett. He's above Scottie Pippen, Elgin Baylor, Charles Barkley, David Robinson, Kawhi.
Is this already or
Dwayne Wade? This was in 2020.
Okay.
So in 2020 they made this list. He's already there. Who would he rise above if he got 1 or even 2 more titles? Let's say this Paul Pierce thing happens. So he's 2 or 3 titles. Moses Malone.
Are you starting from 18 going on up?
Yeah, this is number 18.
Okay. Keep going.
Karl Malone. He rises above Karl Malone to me.
Yeah.
Right? Jerry West, that one's tough. The eras are so different, but Jerry West only won 1 title. So maybe that moves him above. Julius Erving is number 15. That's kind of a similar thing, different eras, but you get 2 titles. Kevin Durant, is he higher than Kevin Durant? Because Kevin Durant's getting put up high because of the couple titles he won with the Warriors there.
Durant one's hard because his career's just not over. I got
Curry. Steph Curry is number 13 on this list.
Ooh, no, I'm sorry.
What if Dirk has 3 titles and he wins Finals MVP in all of them?
Well, Steph has 5, right? Rings.
No,
or
Steph
4. Steph has 4.
Steph has 3, right?
I thought he had 4.
Am I off?
My bad.
Probably off.
The thing with the Steph thing is
Steph has 3, 15, 8, 17, and 18.
Okay. The thing with the Steph thing is, like, Dirk's gonna beat him in all the all-time stuff. Like, you got to have the combination of the Durant stuff. He's gonna be up there. Steph's just not gonna be up there.
And if it's 3 and 3 titles, like let's say Dirk had won 3 and Curry had won 3.
Yeah, he's over Steph.
Then Dirk is over Steph. The next one, Hakeem Olajuwon.
Dream got 2 titles. They're in the mid-90s.
Dream got 2. So if Dirk and Hakeem are tied with 2 titles, they're probably that would be an easy pairing on every all-time list to just put them together, right? Like it's just okay. Two of the greatest big men both got 2 titles. Let's just put them.
I think he would secure a top 12 spot. Like I'm not going to do the.
Hakeem is number 12. The rest of it is Oscar Robertson, and then dang. Stupid articles.
Well, if you do top 15 easily, I mean
Shaq, he's not above Shaq, I don't think. Kobe, Duncan, Bird, Wilt, he's not getting up there with 3 titles.
But he's right there at that tier though with Hakeem. And for me, and this is going to be blasphemous on this podcast, but sorry guys, I love Dirk, but I've always given the best international player title to Olajuwon. And his overall game and what he could do with the ball handling, defensively, the moves, the skills, and everything that Olajuwon had, like peak Olajuwon, like
the way he's able to take advantage of the times when Michael Jordan didn't play in the NBA, like just peak,
that's true.
just peak taking advantage.
I mean, I would go a step further. I mean, yeah, I would take Olajuwon over Shaq, to be honest, but that's
Shaq.
That's a different combination.
Shaq is all time, man. He is.
Yeah, shout out to those finals when Olajuwon gave him his, school lunch, but
gave who?
But Shaq.
Oh, when he was like 15 years old.
But no, I think that's like, it wouldn't even be the conversation. Like Dirk, we already like consider Dirk the best power forward of all time. At least I do. Like, I think he's already over.
Duncan's a center. Dirk best power forward of all time.
Exactly. That's the thing. So I don't even think it's the combination or the conversation. Like Dirk is with Olajuwon in that 12 to 13 range. Yeah. To where I think a lot of people right now be like, oh, Dirk's top 20. He would solidify himself as top 15.
Top 15.
Probably top 12, top 13.
Incredible what if that just popped up today of all days that happened to us on this What If Wednesday. Guys, we'll be back with more stuff. Thanks so much for listening to Locked On Mavs.
Peace out.
Boom.